Hello and welcome to another edition of Happenings.
Really is all about and bringing the community to the school.
In the schools, developing relationships with students, with parents. No, we just taped a show on that.
Hello and welcome to Happenings in the Dearborn Public Schools. I'm David Mustonen, Director of Communications for the Dearborn Public Schools. So they say that you learn to read so you can eventually read to learn. See how that works? Very convenient. And today we are going to be learning about a reading legislation that is going to be impacting schools across the state of Michigan. But before we do that, introduce, as always, my co-host and sidekick here, Dr. Maleyko. How are you doing, Glenn?
Doing well. Happy New Year, David.
Happy New Year. That's right. Here we are, 2019 already. Hard to believe.
How was your break?
Very good. Very restful. Very nice. Yours?
Same here. I think it's the only time of year where the district shut down 7 days, and it's family time and spending time with the family, and so real good downtime.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, absolutely.
And we didn't have to worry about, the weather was very nice over break, which was very nice.
It was nice.
Unless someone was trying to head up skiing or something.
Sure. They were disappointed there. But I wasn't worried either way because even though the district is 7 days, I took 3 extra vacation days, and Shannon Peterson was in charge, so she had to shut something down. It'd be all on her. So I wouldn't have to worry about it. I was out of state, so.
Well, joining us today, our resident reading expert when it comes to this whole third grade legislation, read by third grade legislation, Dr. Jill Chochol. Jill, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And I think Dr. Chochol, she's presented on this topic in preparing presentations for the topic, but related to early childhood literacy, and she's probably one of the leading minds in this area in the state, I'd say, and I've heard that from other people, and she's really done a great job, and so we're glad to have her to kind of talk about this. Also, she's leading our task force, I know, in the district to address the Read by Third Grade, and her and I happened to be, just before the break, we went on to the CNA radio show where we talked about the Read by Third Grade to try to get more information out for parents, and I think one of the reasons why it's not as much out there is because it hasn't impacted anything yet. Right. Once this retention provision comes in, then there'll be an impact potentially for our students. And so that's why we've put the best person in for the job to lead the task force, and she's moving on it. So, Jill, what are your thoughts on this, task force and this legislation moving forward?
Well, I think that the Read by Third Grade legislation is a great opportunity, certainly for the district to share the educational practices that are in place for the students. I think it's an opportunity to share with parents, to share with community members, to share with anyone from the district or community, including high school teachers who may or may not know a lot about elementary reading instruction. It's an opportunity to share not only what the legislation is, but what are the practices that Dearborn teachers and administrators have put in place, not just in the last couple of years since the legislation passed. The legislation passed in October of 2016, so it impacts this year's second grade students beginning next year when they're in third grade.
So the students who will be starting third grade in the fall of 2019, correct?
Yes, that is
okay.
Correct.
And so, as you said, this legislation was passed a couple years ago, said that all students had to be reading at grade level or proficient by third grade, and this was based upon what? On what tests? How do we know that?
That's a great question. So what the legislation says is that the state test, which is currently the MSTEP, a student must be either proficient on the ELA, the English Language Arts portion, in reading, or to score no more than 1 year below grade level. So a student who's not quite proficient but is not a full year below grade level would not be required to be retained under the language of the legislation. There's also additional language that says if a student is more than a year below grade level, there are other measures, including a portfolio. There are exemptions that are that students may have if they are students with a disability, English language learners. There's a lot of language that qualifies who would be required to be retained under the law and who is eligible for what the legislation calls a good cause exemption.
And so this is really the whole holding kids back at third grade. I mean, this is really the whole big part of this that kind of puts a little fear in parents when they hear this, because they're thinking, well, oh my gosh, my child's going to be held back. And we're not just talking about this is legislation for the entire state of Michigan. So you can have second graders across the entire state who are expecting to go to third grade next year and then would be held back. Just logistically alone, that seems almost impossible for school districts to carry out. But more importantly, what you touched a little bit upon some of these exemptions or some of those kinds of things, which is important that parents find out about. And I know that that's part of what the task force that you've assembled is going to be that education component for parents as well. I think, too, it's important to understand, and you did touch on this, too, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this. This seems like something, brand new legislation. But really, reading is something that we've been doing for years as far as interventions and steps to make sure that students are reading at grade level.
Right. So the law obviously was 2 years, but Dearborn has been working on these practices for truly decades. But in the last 10 years, much more intensively, such as reading instruction, including the 5 essential components of reading vocabulary comprehension, phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency, reading interventions that come from assessing students, knowing where they are, and then giving them instruction in small groups that helps to meet their needs, professional learning for teachers, which the district has been engaged in with the Dearborn Teacher Reading Academy for the past 7 years. So there are a number of elements in the legislation that the Michigan Department of Education is required to define, a number of elements that districts are required to put in place, and then truly the teaching and learning that occurs in every classroom at every school is where the performance of students will make a difference. Now, the district has put a number of different things in place at the direction of the Board of Education, meaning expansion of preschool. So we know that parents are first and foremost our children's first and lifelong teachers, and parent education leading up to a great expansion in preschool in Dearborn have been one of the supports that we've put in place for families so that we can help students be even more prepared for school. The addition of Young Fives classrooms, we have 14 in the district, all-day kindergarten, which Dearborn provided before the state required it. So Dearborn's been engaged in these best practices for children long before the legislation was enacted.
And I would say, too, it shows, too, by conference presentations. We were at the state, you've presented at different conferences. I know administrator conferences. You were at the State Superintendent Association back in September. Mm-hmm. And you have a presentation moving forward that we're going to give in January. In fact, one of the groups we're affiliated with, Middle Cities Organization, is asking for information. And I said, well, we're presenting at the conference on this, so we'll bring this forward, because there's a lot of questions by not just here in Dearborn, but administrators and teachers all across the state. I just want to emphasize, too, that when this law was created, it was kind of created, the first discussion of it, I think, was like 2015. And part of it was, it was very partisan. It was very political at the time, and it was on the national election of 2016 was coming up. So this was looked at as, okay, we're going to hold these accountable. We're going to make this impact. The problem is that the legislature really didn't follow the research. It's a good idea of these interventions and things, and they really didn't provide there was some support, but not a lot. But the retention provision is pretty much, for the most part, is not effective. Mm-hmm. And I just want to put it out there that, I'm affiliated with the State Superintendents Association, the Michigan School Board Association, Tri-County Alliance, and the Wayne County Association, among many others across the state, all told them that this would not be effective. Having said that, the initial legislation, the way the bill was written, was it was going to be no exemptions. So the work that we did advocating in Lansing allowed for some changes. So we were able to allow for, because ELL students that just arrived in the country, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to retain these kids. And so we know the research in the field is clear as that retention is not effective. So then the question is, why would you implement such a provision? So I do think the intent of it was positive, and it stands for, of course, we want all kids reading by third grade. But the reality is was there resources provided? There really wasn't. There was limited amount. And so it's left it up to us in the district to come up with our own practices and protocols to implement. We may share with others, and that's why we said we're going to do the same thing we always do. We're not going to sit back. We're going to take the lead, and that's why I came to Joe. Came up at some board meetings, and I said, let's get a task force together with the community to figure out how to deal with it. So that's what we're doing. We're being proactive because I don't think a lot of information is out there for the parents, and that's why we're doing this show as well, is to get that information out. So I just want to put it into a little perspective: is that we did not support this legislation. We of course support literacy for early childhood, but we don't support necessarily all the provisions of the law, but it is law, and so we are obligated as leaders of the district to implement and follow the law within all the provisions.
Well, and I think that that's a very important point that you made right there. This is the law. We must follow the law. Now, what we do in order to make sure that our students are where they need to be, and to make sure that, we're looking at these provisions for students who, like we said, may be English language learners or may not, or may only be a grade level behind in that. We being aware of all of those things, making our parents aware of all of those things, I think is vital and important. I understand there is a real, the common sense approach is, well, yeah, kid should read by third grade. Yeah, and if he doesn't, keep him back until he does read by third grade, right? That's the kind of the common sense approach. I get it. It makes sense. However, as you pointed out, Glenn, the research just does not show that holding kids back that's not the intervention to get them to read.
Absolutely not.
And get them up to grade level. Some of these things that you've pointed out that we're doing here in Dearborn, especially some of the preschool programs and getting and providing those supports for children, these are the interventions that we want to have in place to get these kids up to speed.
And I think that, again, once the legislation passed, it also helped to sharpen our focus on what other strategies did we need to employ as a district, as building administrators, as classroom teachers, in order to strengthen the partnership between families and the school. So the parent education components have gotten stronger and more effective. Parent read-at-home programs that are available in every elementary school with books and manipulatives and materials to help parents work with kids at home, model reading, and ensure that students get a lot of practice. Those are all additional pieces that are also covered in the legislation that we, I think, got a little bit stronger at providing in every school. So the task force is designed to gather input from the individuals who are able to attend, so that if there are other suggestions or recommendations that we could consider that are research-based and best practice, that we can examine those recommendations and see what other supports we can put in place.
And so the work of the task force, where will the community be able to kind of find out where that, what's coming out of that?
The district has a blog under the Executive Directors of Student Achievement, and there is a read at third grade component of that, and the legislation, the MDE information that is also available on the Michigan Department of Education website is linked there. Wayne County RESA has also formed a task force, and Dearborn had 3 of us who were on the task force and participated in the development of support materials. That information is also linked there. So district website, Executive Director of Student Achievement blog, and then the Read at Third Grade link will allow parents, teachers to access to the community to access the information.
Great. Well, and I know we've got some information in the First Bell, too, in the January edition of the First Bell that is delivered to all the homes in Dearborn, in the Dearborn Public School District. We have an article about it in there, and we will continue to keep people abreast through our First Bell publication. as well. I'm just shameless plug.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. Yeah,
You might as well.
And I want to say too that once the recommendations are provided after the task force finishes, at some point we'll, the recommendations will go through a normal process of cabinet and administration, and then it'll also, there'll be some sort of presentation we're looking at some presentations before the Board of Education. So that'll be very public, and we'll get that information out there so we can share it, live, in an open meeting.
Great. Well, I can see why you selected Dr.
Yeah,
Chochol
absolutely.
to lead this effort. Thank you very much for sharing all that great information with us today.
Right, it's a journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Glenn, thanks.
Well, thank you. And
Another good episode.
since you did a plug, I got to do a plug.
Oh,
too.
sure. Yeah.
So you got a new program coming up that you came up with, and the students actually, because the students said they wanted to see more of the selfies.
Okay.
We took one already here. I won't do it again right now,
Okay,
but
yeah.
we'll get one. I got enough today earlier at Rotary with the chief had ad. But anyway, they wanted to see more short videos, and my council had said that. So the program is every Tuesday at 2:30. There's going to be 2 minutes live with the superintendent live. Superintendent Maleyko is the address on Instagram.
Okay.
And we go live, no more than 2 minutes. People can click in, and then I'll actually save it. Now, normally it'll be live. There may be sometimes I have to tape because obviously I'm driving or other things.
Sure,
I'm not
right.
going live for safety reasons. But it'll be pretty much right around 2:30 on Tuesdays, and we already tried. We tested the first one. There were a few kinks, but we worked through it. It was your actually idea to come up with the theme, so I appreciate it. But I'm trying to plug that out there, and it seems to be popular already as students clicked in. And so, maybe you'll be with me next Tuesday at 2:30, and we'll
Never
see.
know.
You might be live again.
You never know where you're going to
Or
pop
you,
up.
Dr. Chochol.
Oh, you never know.
Yeah.
It might be on Tuesday at 2:30.
And I think I just surprised the SIP committee. I gave them 30 seconds and said, hey guys, just one thing, I need your help. We're going live in about 30 seconds, so just be prepared to share your name and the information. What are you doing here? Ad lib.
Just go with it. Well, so there you go. Instagram, 2:30s, Tuesdays. Look for Superintendent Maleyko and giving his fun 2 minutes. Now, and that could be great because if you're at a school and you're a student, boy, they're really going to jump on that quickly, I'm sure. Well, that's all our 2 minutes, even though we did a little bit more than 2 minutes. We are done for this episode of Happenings in the Dearborn Public Schools. Thanks for stopping by and spending a few minutes with us because, with such a big district and all the students and all the programs and all of our schools, there's always something happening in the Dearborn Public Schools.